the beach as the sun went down, an idea which was initially resisted for reasons which I have never fully understood. Anyway, somehow the whole event came together and culminated in a dream-come-true evening in which I sat at the back of a packed hall in Pennon and watched the strange wonderment of Local Hero unfold with an increasingly emotional Forsyth by my side. Despite having watched it 50 or 60 times, the movie never fails to move me, and as it played out on that starry autumn night, I was once again enraptured by its dark and timeless spell. Some people think of it as charming, heartwarming fare, but there's something much more moody and subversive which causes it to break my heart, a quality which Forsyth perfectly encapsulated when he described Local Hero as a cross between Brigadoon and Apocalypse Now. But as we sat there, with me wondering whether life could actually get any better than this, Bill suddenly leaned across and whispered in a not very sotto voce, "This isn't the movie." "What?" I replied, baffled. "This isn't the movie," he said again. "This is some TV version of the movie." I didn't understand what he meant. I looked up at the screen, wondering whether it was being projected in the wrong ratio, square rather than oblong, but no, there was Local Hero in all its rectangular cinematic glory. "What do you mean it's some TV version?" I asked. "Well, there's loads of stuff missing," said Bill. "Stuff missing? What stuff?" "Well, like just then when they stopped the car because it was too foggy to drive. There's a whole conversation that's been cut out, an entire scene." I thought about this for a moment. I'd been watching the movie very closely, and I was pretty damn sure we hadn't skipped even a single word. Yet Bill was flustered, sure that something was wrong. Which scene do you mean?" I asked, adding gently that I haven't noticed any cuts. Bill took a deep breath, as if readying himself to enact the missing scene right there and then he stopped, deflated, wrong-footed, unsure. "I think," he said, as much to himself as to me, "that I'm remembering the script rather than the film." He turned and smiled at me. "I think," he went on, "that I cut that scene out myself. In the editing, I can't quite remember. I thought I'd left it in, but it was so long ago, and now I'm not sure." "Well, I've seen this film loads of times," I assured him, "and honestly, what's up there on the screen is the film that's been out there in the world for the past 25 years. "Ah, yes," said Bill sagely, "the film that's been out there in the world. I'm not so familiar with that. I just know the film that's been inside my head." Exactly. I wanted to hug him, but I resisted and sat quietly in my seat, dreaming of the film inside Bill Forsyth's head. The film that has been playing inside my head for the last 40 years is Krakatoa East of Java, an old-fashioned action spectacular from 1969 which boasted Thunderbird-style special effects, later enhanced by the stomach-rumbling power of Feel-A-Rama. Today, the film is perhaps best known for its geographically challenged title, for, as any fool know, Krakatoa is actually due west of Java, duh. But for me, Krakatoa East of Java retains a special place in my heart for containing the first scene I can actually remember seeing in a movie house, the Crescent, Douglas Isle of Man. Oh, I know there was lots of stuff with ships and air balloons and exploding volcanoes, largely because most of those crowd-pleasing highlights were depicted on the poster and very probably in the trailers. But I can't remember watching them, only being aware that I had seen them after the fact and in the abstract. Strangely, the only scene that I can actually remember watching, that I can replay in what Tropic Thunder's Simple Jack calls my head movies, is a sequence which appears to have nothing to do with fiery mountains or thundering ships, the very elements which would doubtless have appealed to an enthralled 6-year-old boy making an early foray into a picture palace. Steven Spielberg once told me that he was crushingly disappointed when taken to see the movie The Greatest Show on Earth as a kid to discover that, despite the posters, it wasn't a real circus at all, merely an image projected onto a flat screen behind a tatty velveteen curtain. Yet when that curtain drew back and giant phantasmagorial moving pictures started dancing before his eyes, he was transfixed, not least by the spectacular train wreck, which was the movie's high-tech action highlight. Now, I'm pretty certain that my reaction to Krakatoa would have been identical, But while Spielberg can still describe in detail the delicious terror of watching that train roll and plunge toward metal-grinding catastrophe, I can summon no such recollections of witnessing molten lava spew forth from a volcano while airships dangle perilously in mid-air. In fact, if you wait there a moment, I'll just pop over to YouTube, where someone has almost certainly uploaded the most memorable moments of Krakatoa, illegal but useful, and see if they ring any bells. Won't be a moment. Righto, I'm back. You still there? Good. Sorry to have kept you waiting, but it was worth it because, as I suspected, all the key scenes were indeed there: volcanoes, boats, waves, etc., along with a trailer which reprised the most action-packed moments, and I honestly can't remember seeing any of them before. What I do remember, with the certainty of Noah deciding that umbrella stocks were going up, is this. A wounded, handsome man is lying in his sickbed, unable to move. I think his leg has been damaged, but with his cavalier spirit clearly intact. In my mind, he has a moustache, but that may well be wishful thinking. I've never been able to grow proper facial hair, and am therefore unreasonably impressed by anyone who can. Anyway, the man is somehow incapacitated and is being tended to by a woman in a russet dress with reddish hair piled high upon her head. There's some kind of repressed, playful tension between these two characters. He is roguish, she is demure. They are discreetly flirty. At some point, she turns to walk away from him, moving screen left to right, his head being at the far left of the picture, the camera at a low angle from the side of his bed. As she moves away, he reaches and slyly catches hold of the end of a piece of stringy lace which crisscrosses the back of her dress like a corset. She walks a couple of paces until the lace pulls tight, and then she turns to look back at him with a knowing expression on her face. And then, who knows? Does pulling the piece of lace or string make the dress fall off? I think not. Certainly not in a U-certificate feature which had been passed as fun for all the family. In fact, surely pulling the lace would merely make it more secure so that the woman's clothing would become even more impregnable than before. The scene could hardly be described as racy, even by the comparatively prudish standards of 1969. And yet it sticks in my mind in a manner which is so clearly primal and protean that I'm almost embarrassed to have to say it out loud like this. I'm certain that anyone with a GCSE pass in elementary psychoanalysis could write a long and lurid essay on the significance of that moment in the evolution of my personality, doubtless concluding that I've grown up into an S&M fetishist with a weakness for restraining straps and a side order of cross-dressing to go. But what's more significant than any evidence of traumatic erotic displacement is the fact that I'm not even certain that this scene was in the film at all. Like that whole Kim Hunter-Liza Minnelli mix-up, I may well be dealing cards from the bottom of my mental deck, merrily shuffling scenes from one film into another, and then preserving them forever in the aspic of my unreliable memory. As I mentioned earlier, there's a psychotic editor on the loose in my head, creating their very own Cinema Paradiso, or in my case, Cinema Inferno. There's only one way to sift the fact from the fiction. I'm going to have to sit down and watch Krakatoa East of Java again for only the second time in 40 years. But not right now. For now, let's move on to the other key moments of Merry Hell, which constitute my earliest movie-going memories. When I was a child, film programmes changed not on Fridays, as is now the case, but on Sundays, which meant that even in a one-screen cinema it was possible to see 2 different films on a weekend, 4 if you counted the supporting features. Growing up in Finchley Central, North London, I was in striking distance of several cinemas which represented the different distribution chains dominating the market in the early 70s. First and foremost, there were the Odeons, 2 of which, Hendon and Temple Fortune, I could walk or cycle to within an hour. I could also catch a number 26 bus to both, but to do so would wipe out the pocket money which I was holding back for sweets, so I tended to go for the self-steam option. Further afield, there were the ABC and Ionic cinemas in Golders Green, the Classic in Hendon, which oddly was nowhere near the Hendon Odeon, the Gaumont in North Finchley, and the Everyman in Hampstead. And then, of course, there was the Rex, latterly reborn as the Phoenix East Finchley, which remains the single most significant cinema in my development as a bona fide cinema obsessive. In moments of weakness, I dream of dying and having my ashes scattered down the left-hand aisle of the Phoenix, marking the pathway from the door to the seat where I would sit religiously, 10 rows from the front, aisle only, thank you very much, watching the late-night double bills which first introduced me to the work of David Lynch, David Cronenberg, George A. Romero, John Waters, Alejandro Jodorowsky, Ken Russell, et al. It was here that I learnt to be a film critic, but it was in the Odeons and the ABCs that I gorged myself on the mainstream trash which I still love to this day. For example, it was at the Odeon Hendon that I first saw Brannigan, in which John Wayne played an artificially tonsured Yankee cop who comes to London to take on England's crooks Chicago style. The poster featured Wayne and his toupee brandishing a large gun in the foreground, while in the background a car leapt over a perilous gap between the tarmac jaws of the iconic Tower Bridge. It was also here that I saw Juggernaut, in which Shakespearean hellraiser Richard Harris downshifted as a bomb disposal expert, pitting his wits against the titular villain, oh, you're a good man, Juggernaut, but so am I, who had laced an ocean liner with high explosives which threatened to blow Roy Kinnear right off the poop deck. And, most importantly, it was here that I first saw Slade in Flame, an unexpectedly grim gem starring everyone's favourite glam rock stompers, which I have since declared to be the Citizen Kane of British pop movies. Now, this is no idle claim. Despite starting life as a goofy sub-Beatles knockoff, Slade in Flame really was surprisingly confrontational fare. Even the name was provocative, flickering with the promise of Britain's favourite pop act on fire with success, whilst ominously suggesting some sideburn-singeing crash-and-burn conflagration. The official title may have been merely Flame, but that Slade in prefix was emblazoned on all the posters and fizzled across the screen during the film's molten opening credits. Scenes of the band in white suits with projected infernos licking away at their lapels added to the sense of sacrifice, with Noddy, Dave, Jim and Don lit up on stage like some Wicker Man-style funeral pyre. According to legend, Slade in Flame was originally envisaged as a sci-fi pastiche entitled The Quatermass Experiment. Quatermass Experiment, get it? Which featured Noddy as the eccentric professor and had Dave Hill killed by a Triffid in the first 15 minutes. Somehow, this mutated into a more down-to-earth story about the reality rather than the myth of superstardom in the 60s and 70s. Director Richard Longcrane and screenwriter Andrew Birkin, brother of ooh-ahing songstrel Jane, joined Slade on tour in America, using their adventures to fuel a down-and-dirty tale of bickering wannabe pop stars snapped up by a soulless advertising magnate and sold to the public as a pre-packaged product. "I'm not a bloody fish finger," complains Jim Lee in one memorably caustic moment. Early drafts of the Flame script, bolstered by additional dialogue from David Humphreys, were sweary enough to earn an X rating, a claim supported by John Pidgeon's savagely readable novelisation, of which I still own a battered paperback copy signed by the author. To secure a wider audience, i.e. kids like me, the filmmakers reined in the language but kept the rough and toughness of the action. In its finished A-rated cut, Flame retained its vicious streak, with the scumbags of the music business jointly personified by greyhound racing manager-cum-thug Mr. Harding, Johnny Shannon, still sizzling from performance, and slimy salesman Mr. Seymour, Tom Conti, in his first starring role. My favourite character was pub circuit loser Jack Daniels, played by Alan Lake, who had served time in prison and who apparently researched his role with a liquid lunch, which got him fired on his first day. After assurances that his spouse Diana Dawes would police his sobriety for the rest of the shoot, Lake was reinstated and proceeded to earn his keep, a scene in which he's dragged semi-naked into a darkened street to have his toes smashed in with a shovel remains a wince-inducing highlight of Flame, closer to the hardcore nastiness of Get Carter than the food fight fun of Never Too Young to Rock. As for the band, they play the dark side of the rock and roll dream with a commitment which bordered upon the kamikaze. Holder and Lee provided the dramatic core, scrapping and squabbling their way from pubs and clubs to studios and stages, with fleeting glimpses of friendship and affection giving way to shouting matches and petty spats, a typical onstage exchange. "Will you shut up? Well, at least I was in tune." Don Powell was the sympathetic dork, the learning of his lines made harder by a car crash which had left him with amnesia. Dave Hill, meanwhile, played Flame's knob of a guitarist Barry with a frighteningly relaxed naturalness.